Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Beyond the Screen interview series, where we take a deep dive into the world of digital signage with top experts from our ecosystem of partners. Today I'm joined by John Bathgate of Samsung Displays.
John Bathgate from Samsung Display UK. I've actually been in the UK display team for 7 years. So more importantly, I focus on certain vertical markets. So that's supermarket and the QSR sector, very buoyant sectors over the last few years, obviously. I also have 15 years experience with the tier 1 supermarket and QSR accounts. So I like to think I have something of a sort of trusted reputation within those certain end users. So my job really is about what makes the brand invest in digital technology, not just the hardware platform, but obviously the CMS side of things in terms of the software, how it all works together. We obviously work indirectly with our partners, so we transact through our ecosystem, and that's effectively my role. So I would say that I sort of really focus on value and vision as opposed to price and product. I like to steer conversations into that strategic level of how the end user is going to benefit from our solutions.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, John. Like you say, you've been in the market for 7 years, right? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes over the last 7 years. We're all seeing an explosion over the last few years in digital signage, particularly in the QSR and retail sector, right? Where do you see the market for digital signage going forward? What's the future look like? What's new? What's exciting?
Okay, so for me, I think we've had many years of brands keeping up with each other in terms of how they manage their digital signage. I think we're getting to a stage now where we're looking at some very sort of proactive measures where organizations are thinking about the future, not just how their end users interface with digital signage, but how they're providing a platform, a scalable platform on which to develop. And now I think we're into the phase we're talking about, rather than just keeping end users happy, we're looking at potential, mainstream investment on brands that work with other brands in terms of advertising revenue. So the future for me is really around advertising revenue, creating the right platforms for how organizations can move forward and benefit from that.
It's interesting, John. We're going to talk about the future of sort of retail networks and retail media later on. Yeah. Do you think that's the biggest driver now? Because we're definitely seeing an uptick. Trust pipeline's never been bigger in this space. Yeah. We talk to our competitors, we talk to the ecosystem in the market, and there's a lot of interest and a lot of projects on the moment. Yeah. Outside the normal sort of playlist type environment. Yeah. So do you think that is the sort of main driver behind that is additional income, additional revenue stream for the retail sector, or is it, is that the only driver at the moment, do you think?
Okay, so I think if we're talking about what does success look like, I think there's really a combination of return on investment factors. I think gone are the day of creating a platform that gives you increased revenue or increased profit. I think there are many other factors. Most organizations probably have between 5 and 10 factors that are important for them to make this type of investment. So to give an example from the QSR world, one of the largest QSR organizations in the UK actually realized that through their drive-through investment, they created a massive hike in order accuracy. And that's very important for them in terms of food wastage, package wastage. It's not just about the profit levels, it's about those subtle improvements in operation that can create a massive benefit for those organizations. So yes, it's traditionally about the right business decisions around revenue and profit, but let's not forget all the other advantages that the platform might bring. Order accuracy is one I mentioned. Other things could be, making sure that your customers are more loyal, making sure that if they introduce a new customer to you, they're rewarded as well. Always keep in mind the end user.
Yeah, I think we've seen a similar we've got a similar view. What we're seeing is customers still want to sell more of their product and using digital signage to do that. and it's becoming more complex now in terms of the way the digital signage is being used in terms of interaction and AI, etc. But we are personally not seeing is the media network or the advertising revenue being the fundamental driver. There's still as you say, 5 to 10 drivers, which people look at as an ROI model,
Yeah.
And in that vein, John, obviously one of the biggest barriers for the sector to get to, if you're not already doing digital signage, to get there is the capital cost, right? It can be quite expensive depending upon the footprint, the size, the number of you in your estate. Have you any tips for people who are thinking about it, and how you get over that barrier at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because obviously within these projects we're looking at costs, we're looking at what companies are spending their money on. As I said at the start, what makes these brands invest in technology, and not just the Samsung display, that related software and services. I think that comes down to really sort of planning your journey very carefully. So if you look at someone like Tesco's, for example, the reason I mentioned them is that they're the leading market share supermarket in the UK.
Yeah.
They will use their partnership of marketing and creative organizations to really work through very precisely what they're trying to achieve. They roll out to sort of 5 main stores, they roll out to 50 main stores, always keeping an eye on the return on investment that each individual project is making. So it's not so much about finding millions to invest in the solution. It's actually about, what is the journey? Does it work in 5 stores? Does it work geographically? Let's not ignore the age groups within our end users. Good example there. Let's get kids to sort of look up at digital display rather than head down on their phone all the time. Whereas an older generation might not be used to digital display. So it's a question of engaging them and making sure that they can make the most of special offers. So I think the key to advancement is really planning the pilots, the extended pilots, measuring return on investment along the way, and then pulling the trigger on wider scale rollouts.
Yeah, a proof of concept, and then measure its success is kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the sort of common mistakes that you're seeing being made by people starting the journey or already on the journey to deploying digital signage?
Yeah, that's a really good question in terms of what things go wrong. I've been involved in many RFPs with many brands that are looking for wide-scale digital rollout. I think doing everything overnight is probably a mistake, and until you sort of feel your way through that particular journey. I think you need to plan your success metrics very, very carefully. Make sure that they're aligned with your brand. Make sure that they're aligned with the end users. Don't assume that your end users always want the same thing. Mix things up a bit in terms of the solutions and the content that you're offering. And also, don't invest in digital and media platforms just for the sake of keeping up with the Joneses. It's got to be in line with your particular brand. I was talking to a major coffee chain yesterday, and they sort of self-confess that they have not been keeping up with the brands on the high street because they really like their printed environment. They like to advertise their sustainability. They think that customers might see the investment as a non-sustainability factor. So they've taken their time, and I think they will benefit in doing that very, very carefully.
That's interesting because we see that the sustainability issue is quite is obviously fervent and at the forefront of a lot of people's sort of agendas, right? Around and paper can be a challenge, right? And there's a high cost of printed media, yeah. So in terms of the Samsung world, how does that help with the ESG targets and the sustainability targets?
Well, it's a tough one for us because I would normally go in and talk to everyone about, I try to qualify opportunities before I talk to end users. If they're not ready to make investments, then they're not going to move forward. But I have to be very understanding of the fact that, in the early days of digital menu boards, it was all about paper pricing versus the electronic option. And we were very cognizant of that, and we were sort of pushing customers forward. But the simple reality is those customers will move forward when they're ready, and they will measure those costs accordingly. I think, because we've all got experience in terms of myself directly and with our partners, about judging that right time to push towards a sort of digital environment. But I wouldn't sort of overdo that, if sustainability was a big factor that they were thinking about and their end users were thinking about. I think it's all about timing in that case.
Yeah, but digital signage, can help reduce, reduce carbon consumption, right? Because of the
Yeah,
low energy, and if it's managed properly, then it can have a, printed material, shipping a printed material on a regular basis does
yeah,
have a high carbon consumption basis, doesn't
yeah.
it? Yeah.
I totally agree. And actually, looking back at the older days of things like digital menu board, when the first customers were coming on board with that, it was very much down to printed versus digital environment. And we still have the old formulas in place around how people measure that. It's not just the paper cost, it's not just sending paper to store, it's also the training cost, making sure that supermarkets in particular, say on a Wednesday morning, they have their training session, they change the Christmas promotion to the Easter promotion. That all has to be done. That has a high cost of printing, high cost of management, and staff have to be doing that regularly. There's also legal wraps around this in terms of advertising the right product, making sure the pricing is correct. So those formulas are still very much in place. But I think nowadays it's so much more in terms of providing a scalable, future-proof platform other than just comparison with the old school printing costs.
What do you think customers are missing? Is there anything specific that where you're seeing a thread or a trend on where customers are missing something? Is this, because in my eyes, there's two types of customers. The customers that already started the digital signage journey, they're evolving, and the customers that have not started it. You just mentioned a coffee chain that have not gone on the digital signage bandwagon for the reasons you described, right? But what are people missing? Is there one sort of golden bullet or one trick, that you think they're missing?
Yeah, I think customers need to take into account that they can't be adjusting their brand too much to move into the digital world, because many customers aren't ready to suddenly create new content,
Mm.
move that forward, push that in front of their end users. It's a gradual process, and I think companies that do suddenly turn the corner and move into that digital world in terms of display often recreate their brand to the extent that it's quite damaging and it's isolating some of their end users. Some really good stats from one of my QSR organizations, and this is from about 4 or 5 years ago, is that actually 1 in 4 decisions were affected by internal display posters. So that means that 1 in 4 people are actually making a different decision based on, buying an extra piece of food or an extra drink item during the day.
Mm.
That's really good for the end user to be able to feel that they're part of that process. But if you isolate the end user and change your content too much, you're effectively losing customers. It's just an alternative way of displaying information that becomes more interactive with certain end users. But don't isolate customers into feeling that they have to be part of that journey. I think nowadays as well, there's many challenges on the high street. You look at the conditions that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years. We've had COVID, post-COVID. We've had very testing economic conditions. We've had a demise really in the high street. So I think your basic business has to be very strong before you actually move in to the digital world. You have to have the right P&L. You have to have spare money for investment to test those pilots. Moving into a digital world won't solve the basic business problems if you are struggling with those additional costs that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it's interesting you to say, we know the high streets had some challenges, but, recent research that we've been involved in, still 80% of purchases are still made in store,
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that's interesting. Yeah,
yeah, and my humble experience of and which unfortunately I have to do. I have to go and spend money in store because I've got 5 sons. Even that age group who should be more should be purchasing more online still want to go and touch and feel stuff, particularly when it's
Yeah,
football boots or training shoes or
yeah,
fashion apparel,
yeah,
right? They still have
yeah,
that, and I don't think that'll ever change personally. That's my opinion. There'll be things that, that you buy from Amazon or alternatives to Amazon, as they say in the radio. but
yeah,
there are still that teenage to 20 something group is still wanting to go and have an immersive experience, right? And the thing that's different from that group is that video and video content is normal for them.
yeah.
The brand image that's created, using video content, which we're seeing a lot on the high street. There's a lot of high street retailers, sports retailers, and fashion apparel, as I think is the terminology,
Yeah.
are heavy users of video wall technology, and we're seeing a massive uptick in it. So,
Yeah.
what are you seeing in that world? Because your grocery world, do you think they'll move into trying to drive the brand image with video wall technology, or is that just
Well, a couple of things from that. I think that statistic about, approximately 80% still procured in store effectively it never ceases to amaze me really, because in the late 90s, the 2000s, everyone was talking about online is going to be the next thing, online shopping in particular. And we all know that with Amazon, you want something, you order it, it's here tomorrow. That's great. But also, I was in a supermarket a couple of weeks ago, major brand, and they were explaining that the British way of thinking is to actually still do effectively a weekly shop. Now, that might be online for delivery if both parents are working. It might be the family bringing in for a special meal at the weekend, but 80% of people still like to walk around supermarkets. So that is a massive captive
audience?
environment.
Yeah.
The 20%, however, shopping online, you need to think about other products here. Some people go to car showrooms to see the product, but they might order online. They'll do their own research. So each product and each item of procurement is slightly different, whether it's bread or milk or a car. But when you talk about video as well, interestingly, video wall is now a real sort of cutting edge type of display implementation, particularly in the larger estate supermarkets. Lots of assets, lots of walls on which to sort of hang displays, if you like. But also, you think about the agility of your marketing. 1 second it's beer and barbecues for the Euros, and then it's associated products with the Olympics, and these are massive hooks for procurement. How many people are planning their football barbies, drink, food? How many people are planning their, investments around the sports that they love connected to the Olympics? So that branding is really strong, and you see that all supermarkets in, the top 8 sector, if you like, all have some connection to major events, and I think they would actually experience some real spikes in sales during those periods. So they seem to be using that type of advertising in a very positive manner.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there, right? Which is people are still shopping, particularly in the grocery sector. Yeah, and that's a captive audience, right? So being able to in home market to them, but with your own products and provide a channel through the retail media network to get access to that captive audience, right? Which is millions, right? So it's got to be a real attraction to the brands that are supplying to the large grocery sector to be able to say, what, we've got, here's our demographic, here's our footfall, give us some money, please, and then you can advertise on our assets, because it's going to give you an opportunity to reach an audience you might not have reached before.
And I think the actual brands that are looking at that 80-20 split, they also need to be very cognizant of working in the physical premises of a store and online, because ultimately it's the same messaging. People look at their phones, they look at their trainer adverts, they expect to see the same content in store and online. And if their favorite way of shopping is to a box to arrive and put your new shoes on, great. But if not, and people want to try the product, I think the advertising has to be common across areas. So we see in the end user accounts, digital display projects are driven by marketing people, they're driven by creative media, they're driven by CMS experts. They simply see the physical outlet or the online outlet as another way into serving the end user. So they've
Yeah,
got to they don't need barriers within their own organization to be successful. So we should be encouraging that openness, whether it's a physical store or an online transaction.
yeah, like I think, on the common mistakes or things that people are missing, one of the things we see is people haven't thought long term about the volume and quality of content, you know.
Yeah,
And having that, planned in advance, that's, to me, that's the key. The displays are the displays. The technical side of it, we could talk for
yeah,
hours on, but we'd bore people to death, I would imagine.
yeah,
Is the content is everything, and having that volume of content, because believe it or not, a lot of the high street retailers don't have, in large in-house content delivery or marketing
yeah, yeah,
organizations, So for me, that's probably one of the things that I'm
yeah.
missing.
Do you also think, Steve, that to an extent, some of the brands kind of copy each other just to keep up with, their digital story without thinking about it too much in a way?
I definitely believe that there's definitely a keep up with the Joneses type mentality somewhere, right? I think, I'm working with a recent high street brand. They were definitely cognizant of what their competitors were doing.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's a good thing. You should be right. But hopefully, what we can do is show them how to do it better, faster. And use the technology to their advantage. At the end of the
absolutely.
day, as we've said, right, the digital signage does a number of things. It's not just about increasing profits and revenue, although that should be the number one goal, and it normally is. But it's also about brand image, right? And
Yeah,
and attracting an audience that we're talking about. We're oldies now, John. You've got to remember that, right? But having worked in the industry for a long time, you go into an organization I think one of the best examples I could give is if you've been into a Marks and Spencer's food hall recently, yeah. You know, they've revamped them. They're hip, as they say. They're pretty. It's a great environment to be in. It's a great
yeah,
environment to shop in, right? And obviously the results are proving that. They've made it. The vibe in there's superb, and it
yeah,
uses digital signage as well. So
yeah,
so you do attract customers that might not have shopped you before because of the environment. And I think a lot of the people we work with, and there's a lot of shop designers and people responsible for the image and the feel in the outlets
yeah,
are cognizant of that, and
yeah.
digital signage plays a part in driving that brand, and attracting in buyers, whether it's in window displays or in store video walls, right? Attracting a young, new, vibrant demographics who potentially didn't shop there before.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some underlying branding there. M&S has been known for a long time for the quality of its food and its food products, and effectively it has to keep up with the times. It has
Mm.
to have the right furniture, the right digital environment, if that's the direction that they're going in. So they've got that underlying reputation that they've probably had for 25, 30 years. But yeah, if they're attracting a new audience and people that will spend, a little bit more for quality product, which is effectively their goal, then that's a good business move.
We talked a little bit at the beginning, John, about and it sort of weaved in through the conversation that the sort of retail media piece or the retail
Yeah,
media network piece. Right? There's a lot of hype in the industry at the moment.
yeah,
Everything you see in sort of LinkedIn or through the media and the various media channels, there's a big play on retail media network, right?
yeah.
So a couple of questions on that.
Hmm.
Your views and thoughts. We sort of talked about it. Should it be a fundamental number one thing, or is it just another part of it? And the second question, part of that question is, which is probably the first one to answer, if I've been honest, is are we behind the times compared to the US, right? Because you see a lot in the US. I spend over the last few years, I spent quite a time back and forward in the US, and there's a lot of in-store advertising through digital signage. Right?
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
So my experience in the US is limited, apart from obviously what we saw on LinkedIn and what we learn about other brands. But I think it all comes down to that captive audience. The US have that ultimate, visit to the shopping centre, shopping malls, etc. they're captivated. It's probably not as much as a food shop as other sort of high level brands. So yeah, I would say that we probably are way behind in that area, possibly because of our limited spaces within retail. You know, we are Oxford Street, or we are town high streets as opposed to large shopping centres. So that probably has a factor in terms of how the shopping experience is designed. The point around retail media, I think, you know, it's possible to sort of overdo this. You know, if you're selling trainers, you have a quality product, you need to get the pictures or the videos to the end user. I do like the use of retail media in terms of you walk into a certain store, you see the trainer you like, you pick it up off its pod, you find out about, you know, whether it's best for football or marathon running, because I think those specialized end users really want to find out that type of information. So you know, my kids, for example, they can't get enough of that. I generally know what products I'm after because of my own uh, preferable brands. But I think the younger generation love that. They love the advertising. They love the sort of descriptive information around products. And they're seeing that content online and almost becoming hooked on that product. So that's the message that retail media is delivering, say in the world of Nike or certain trainers, certain shoes, certain fashion items. I think there's a danger that you can take it too far. I think, you know, these brands need to make sure that they protect the integrity of their customer for walking to a store, making a choice. You've already got a customer that goes into your store, whether you force them or not, on the high street. So don't overdo things. And one thing that we haven't talked about here, which is quite interesting, and we've talked about it recently on your retail roundtable, was that some people don't like to be over marketed or oversold to.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're in a wine shop, you pick up your bottle of Malbec, you can read the label on the back of it and see whether it goes with your steak. There's lots of linkage now around showing the products that go with certain meals. And I think that's incredible in terms of giving information out. But do you want to be too intrusive? You still want your end user to make their decision. Retail media also encapsulates much more aggressive type marketing, which is okay, here's an end user XYZ. We've got the metrics of how old they are, male or female. Let's market products to them. I find that slightly intrusive. I would generally go in knowing what I want to buy. I'm not saying we shouldn't be upselling, but we have to be careful with all these different types of retail media to not push it too far and make people feel a little bit oversold to. And that was, you know, many of the people on the board I sat on a couple of weeks ago, with some trust representatives as well, were very much in agreement that we've got to be careful not to overstep that mark.
Yeah, and in terms of the people using retail their digital signage assets to drive external advertising revenue, right? Where do you think the UK market is on that? Because, like I say, there's a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of people talking about it. There's even some of the larger tier one organisations set their own retail media network organisations up as they've done it. Coop have done it, right? Do you think there's obviously a long-term future, otherwise people wouldn't be investing in it, right?
Yeah. Okay, so for me, in terms of, if you look at my sales output, if you like, I'm probably seeing a bit of a 50-50 market. 50% of clients invest because they want to start their digital journey without any consideration of the revenue.
Yeah.
But the more developed half are already thinking about how the platform can be monetized. Yeah. And I think it's definitely the future. It requires lots of careful planning. For example, the Gillettes of this world, the Cadburys, the Coca-Colas, they're going to also think very carefully about how they advertise their products. I think in the mind of many retailers, they think, okay, build a digital platform, get our co-brands or our in-house brands to pay for it. It's simply not as straightforward as that.
Yeah, I totally
because the actual ROI needs to be carefully considered. You have to have very clever software, obviously, that shows proof of play and a real structured audit of how you've used the advertising platform that's available. So I think it is the way of the future in terms of creating revenue through the brands within your own store. But I think even those brands are thinking very carefully about how they monetize their investment on advertising platforms. And that is really the piece to conquer, how you take that to market.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think we sort of touched on it a little bit earlier around, there's two types of customers, right? One who are starting the digital signage journey, and
Yeah,
ones who've started and are starting to evolve, and we're saying the same. I think is it 50-50 probably in reality, even the ones that are starting the journey that we see are talking about it, whereas a few years ago nobody talked about it,
yeah,
but it's like you say, it's not a oh, we'll create a digital estate, and then it'll
yeah,
be easy to sell, because one of the things we see that's missing is analytics, right? What are you going to provide those large brands with that's going to get them to advertise in your digital assets, demographics down to the detail, in terms of
yeah,
footfall, the type of person who shops, the age
yeah,
group,
yeah,
what they buy, the
yeah.
propensity to buy, lots of different things. And I think we're a little bit immature in the UK in terms of having that data in one place. I think the data exists across multiple platforms, particularly in grocery, but I don't think it's in one place.
Yeah, and the other thing on that, Steve, I think is that, when I talked earlier about, Samsung manufacture products effectively, but we have a deep understanding of how the end user uses them to create their digital spaces. If you look at our partnership network or our ecosystem, I think sometimes a reseller like Trust or an SI like Trust effectively almost need to get under the skin of the end user and make a co-investment, which Samsung would often back up as well, in terms of, right, we'll show you how you can make this model work over one store, 50 stores, 100 stores.
Mm.
But that requires a certain level of investment to differentiate yourself from lots of the other channels out there that simply take digital material, add content, and put it on the wall. So
Yeah.
we need to be confident of our story enough to make an investment into those larger brands. And the return on investment on that for both the manufacturer and the SI channels will be enormous if you take that risk, if you like, to help those brands out.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we are doing, John, isn't it? As you know, we're not trying to be a provider of things on the wall. We're
Yeah,
more than just a digital sign, as our sort of internal phrase. But we're trying to work with the customer to understand what the goals are, how we achieve that, and we make the investment through the proof of concept
yeah,
or pilot to
yeah,
ensure that it is fit for
yeah,
purpose. It does do
yeah,
what it says in the tin, and it has the ROI that they've
yeah.
targeted or expect. So I do believe you're right on that.
And I
Right.
think also, just one other thing on that, I think if you look at the heritage of your organization, it's not just about, okay, we're now selling digital signage platforms, hardware and software. I think you need to look at how you have supported the infrastructure of those organizations and how that's led from, say, Wi-Fi into a display world, because you're providing that sort of footprint that the end user needs to create a very effective, scalable system. So it's about the other aspects of your organization that can prop up display as well, which is very important.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, as you said, the a lot of the digital signage projects are driven by marketing or store designers, or store property managers. There's usually lots of different personas involved in the project,
Yeah,
but what we are trying to deliver, as you know, is look, it's the ownership, the end-to-end piece, where you are dependent on the infrastructure to make it scalable, to make the content delivery easy, and that's our heritage. So
yeah,
I think that stands us in good stead.
yeah.
Um, just some quick fire questions, John, because I'm cognizant of time. But
Okay.
how important are analytics, do you think, in the world of digital signage?
So I think analytics are incredibly important. Without analytics, there is no way to prove potential return on investment. Again, similar to as we discussed earlier, let's not overdo this and oversell to the individual end user. So analyze what people are buying, why they're buying it, why they step into a store. Massively critical, but really tie it in with the metrics of each ROI aspect of each project.
Yeah. the key benefit of digital signage we've sort of talked about, and there's lots of we've created an ROI model, a 10-step ROI model, but we again sort of touched a little bit on AI, right? Do you think AI is going to play a big part going forward? Is it here today in the digital signage world, or is it something that's coming in the future?
So interesting topic. I think it really depends on who you talk to and what the sort of psyche of the end user is, as in the customer or the brand. So, for example, again, talking to a coffee chain yesterday, we did discuss AI. So AI in the world of banking might mean blockchain. It might mean saving money on, resourcing, cutting labor costs. But if you think about the major brands in the UK today that are successful, their true asset is their labor. They don't want to put their labor under threat. So in many cases, the question around AI is that it depends what business you're in. In a coffee store, do you want to jeopardize your quality baristas and your customer facing staff? No, you don't. But yes, you do want to use the amalgamation of IoT products that you have to create savings within operations. So it very much depends on the type of customer. I think within the retail and the QSR space, I think AI is more often than not considered around manufacturing process. How are foods made? Can they be made off-site and shipped? But we're not at the stage where we're taking people out that process yet. We need chefs, we need delivery individuals. Let's not sort of conquer everything in one swoop with AI. I don't think it's possible in our sector, but it will be prominent in future when it comes to the IoT of devices effectively.
Excellent. All right, John, thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure as always.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Steve. That's perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much.